Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to a special episode of Live Chat with James here at ProPix TV in Vancouver, British Columbia. Tonight, we're going to take a look at the very polarizing personality and his death. Yes, we're talking about the one and only Charlie Kirk, and we will be discussing all about his life, his death, and his legacy. Whether or not you agreed with his politics and his speeches or his rhetoric and other uh, polarizing issues, I will say that regardless of any of that and what side of the aisle you sit on, there is absolutely no excuse for political crimes, whether that's violence and assassinations or just going after people for speaking their mind. Let's not forget about freedom of speech and the right to be able to share your thoughts with others without the fear of violence coming back at you. There is a right to be safe. There is a right to be respected. And when we forget that and we allow the divisiveness that's overtaking the Western world right now to win, then we are all going to lose. And that's something to remember. Now, I was not a fan of Charlie Kirk. I was not someone who believed in a lot of what he said. However, I would fight to the end to defend his right to be able to speak his mind and to have his opinions and to share them without the fear of violence. And now, of course, we know that his children will grow up without him being an influence in their life and being there to watch them finish grade school or to graduate high school and university or to walk his daughters down the aisle. He's not going to be there to celebrate anniversaries with his wife. And these are tragic things. These are just a disgusting point at where the world has come to at this point. Now we look at a nation at a crossroads, and that was triggered on September the 10th, 2025, under a tent emblazoned with the slogan American Comeback. The American comeback seemed to halt with the crack of a single rifle shot. This happened at Utah Valley University, surrounded by a crowd of approximately 3,000 conservative people that were there to watch conservative activist Charlie Kirk speak, and he was jolted backwards with a fatal wound to his neck. His life ending in a gruesome scene captured on countless smartphones and broadcast instantly to a horrified nation. The assassination of one of the most influential and polarizing figures of his generation was not merely a crime, it was a profound and devastating symptom of a nation grappling with a deep seated pathology of political violence. Now, people, of course, have also looked at this school shooting that happened the same day and were equally outraged on both sides of the aisle. But then you had the select few who used both of these incidents for political gain or to further divide us and try to separate people with differing opinions, and that is wrong. As we continue on with this, I will remind viewers that ProPix Canada Media, in partnership with True Crime and Justice TV, does have a PPCM Fund for Good that helps victims of violence as well as distributing violence prevention, intervention, and other strategic resources to people around the globe, including books, videos, and so forth. And we continue to produce more nonpartisan information to help reduce violence before it happens, to help identify the warning signs and indicators and the precursors to violence, which even in this horrific case of Charlie Kirk could have been prevented if people knew the warning signs and actually acted upon them. All too often, families of the perpetrators or the accused look back and they are able to identify at least 3 to 5 different warning signs that, had they been acted upon, could have prevented the acts of violence, whether that's mass violence in schools or communities or singular acts of violence that impact a nation, such as the death of Charlie Kirk. Now, keeping in mind that there's a lot of political rhetoric, there's a lot of divide on what is appropriate language and what isn't when it comes to public speeches, when it comes to media, news coverage, and so forth. And recently, of course, we know that Brian Kilmeade, a journalist or reporter with Fox News, was let go after his comments about homeless people, saying that they should be extinguished, or along those lines. Now, of course, we know that over the last 24 hours, there were two separate mass shootings at homeless encampments in the US, and whether or not that played a role in it, we don't know. We've got to remember that although you may be speaking to a well balanced and educated crowd or otherwise, that there could be people with mental health issues that take the information that they gain online to a new level that is never anticipated or expected from those who speak those lines, and maybe sometimes even have them misinterpreted by others when they read them or hear them. But back to this specific information, folks, if you do want to assist with the international efforts in Canada, the US, and elsewhere to prevent and reduce violence in communities, whether again it's political violence or school violence or mass acts of violence, you can do so by contributing to the PPCM Fund for Good. The link is on the ProPix Canada website, www.propixcanada.com. That's PROPICS Canada.com, and you can follow the link on there. But let's get back to the important story here, and that is looking at the immediate aftermath was a microcosm of the country's fractured state. Condemnations poured in from across the political spectrum, a rare movement of bipartisan shock at the brutality of this act. Yet, this unity was fleeting. Within hours, the tragedy was conscripted into the very culture war that many believe precipitated it. President Donald Trump immediately blamed the radical left for the attack, while right-wing commentators declared this is war. The event did not create a new conflict. Rather, it poured fuel on a pre-existing raging fire. The speed with which the assassination was instrumentalized by various political sectors demonstrated that the structures for political conflict were already deeply entrenched. Now, this report, therefore, analyzes the assassination of Mr. Charlie Kirk as a manifestation of an ongoing crisis, not the start of one. Now, this moment also forces a national reckoning, posing a central and urgent question. Can this tragedy serve as a catalyst for a de escalation and a renewed commitment to civil discourse? Or will it become another justification for the deepening cycle of retribution and hate? To answer this, one must understand the man at the center of the storm, a uniquely polarizing figure whose life and death encapsulate the very divisions tearing at the fabric of the nation. And this includes the Western world, not just the US. The societal forces that transformed a 22-year-old from a quiet, academically gifted student into a political assassination. Kirk's story is inextricably linked to the story of modern American political conflict, and his death stands as a critical flashpoint, a moment of profound choice for a country standing at a dangerous crossroads. As we look here at the rise and rhetoric of Charlie Kirk and the prodigy of the right, yes, from a garage to the White House inner circle, Charles James Kirk was born on October the 14th, 1993, and raised in the Chicago suburbs of Arlington Heights and Prospect Heights to parents he described as moderate Republicans. His political activism began early. In high school, he volunteered for the U.S. Senate campaign of Mark Kirk, who was no relation, and gained his first taste of media attention after writing an essay for Breitbart News, alleging liberal bias in textbooks. A pivotal moment in his personal narrative, which would later become central to his political brand, was his rejection from the United States Military Academy at West Point in 2012. Instead of pursuing a traditional college education, he briefly attended Harper College before dropping out. The 18-year-old Kirk chose the path of full-time activism. In 2012, with co-founder Bill Montgomery, a Tea Party activist, he launched Turning Point USA, also known as TPUSA, from his parents' garage. The organization initially focused on advocating for free markets and limited government, found a powerful patron in conservative donor Foster Friess, whom Kirk met at a Republican National Convention that same year. Kirk's ascent was meteoric, mirroring the rise of the populist anti-establishment wave that would soon sweep Donald Trump into the presidency. He proved to be a prodigious organizer and fundraiser, transforming TPUSA into one of the nation's largest and most influential conservative youth organizations. His zeal for confronting liberals on their own turf, college campuses, resonated with a new generation of conservatives and a powerful set of financiers. He became a key ally and confidant of President Trump and his family, serving as a personal aide to Donald Trump Jr. during the 2016 campaign and becoming a regular speaker at Trump rallies and TPUSA's lavish concert-like conferences. By the time of his death, Kirk was not just an activist, but a top podcaster, radio host, and central figure in the MAGA movement, credited by Donald Trump himself with helping to mobilize the youth vote and staff the administration. Now let's take a look at the architect of the campus culture wars. The college campus was Charlie Kirk's primary battlefield. He pioneered a style of ideological warfare that treated higher education not as a place for intellectual inquiry, but as a bastion of leftism that needed to be conquered. His signature "Prove Me Wrong" events became a staple of campus life across the country. Sitting behind a table, often under a tent, just like the one he was in when he was killed, Kirk would invite students to challenge his conservative viewpoints. Now, these events served as a multi-pronged strategic purpose. For the conservative students in attendance, many sporting "Make America Great Again" hats, Kirk was a champion who gave voice to their feelings of being marginalized and unwelcome in an academic environment they saw as hostile to their beliefs. For a national audience, the confrontations were a goldmine of viral content. Kirk seemed to relish the jeers and heated exchanges, mastering the art of "what about" retort and the rapid-fire debate style that played perfectly on social media algorithms designed to reward conflict. These clips, endlessly shared, fueled his fame and served as a powerful recruitment tool for TPUSA, which now has more high school chapters than college ones. Beyond debates, Kirk's organization employed more aggressive tactics that fundamentally altered the campus climate. In 2016, TPUSA launched the Professor Watch List, a website that compiled names of academics accused of leftist propaganda and discriminating against conservative students. Critics denounced the list as a McCarthyite tool designed to intimidate and harass faculty, effectively turning students into informants against their professors. Through these methods, Kirk did more than just participate in the culture wars. He was one of its foremost architects, helping to transform American universities into central fronts in a national ideological struggle. The effectiveness of this strategy was deeply rooted in his own life story. Kirk's status as a community college dropout who had been rejected by the military elite was not a political liability, but his greatest asset. He skillfully converted his lack of traditional credentials into a powerful anti-elitist brand that resonated deeply with the populist, anti-intellectual sentiments of the MAGA base. He wore his lack of a degree as a joint of pride, and really he did that well, telling California Governor Gavin Newsom, "I represent most of the country." This created a powerful symbiotic relationship. His personal narrative of being an outsider legitimized his political message of fighting against a corrupt establishment, and his political success, in turn, validated his personal choices. This connection between his biography and his political strategy was a key reason for his profound influence. Let's take a look now at the evolution of a worldview from free markets to Christian nationalism. Over the course of his career, Charlie Kirk's ideology underwent a significant transformation. The early era TPUSA centered on traditional conservative principles of free markets and limited government, needing college students who backed democratic socialists while enjoying the fruits of capitalism, such as Starbucks and Netflix. However, the rise of Trump, Kirk's rhetoric shifted dramatically, becoming more pugnacious and populist. In addition to, of course, the apocalyptic in tone. His commentary grew increasing inflammatory and controversial, often venturing into what critics labeled as racist, xenophobic, and bigoted territory. He called George Floyd, whose 2020 murder by police sparked a national protest, he called him a scumbag. He was a sharp critic of the Black Lives Matter movement and argued that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was a huge mistake. The day before his death, he appeared on Fox News to claim that white individuals were more likely to be attacked by black individuals in the United States of America. Now, a central theme of his later work was an embrace of Christian nationalism. He argued forcefully that there was no true separation of church and state and invoked the Seven Mountain Mandate, a theological belief that Christians are called to dominate seven spheres of society, including government and media. His rhetoric often framed political contests in spiritual terms. During an appearance with Trump, he declared the Democrats stand for everything God hates and called the presidential election a spiritual battle. The fusion of faith and far right polemic made him a hero to the Christian right and a figure of deep concern for those who saw his rhetoric as a threat to a pluralistic democracy. His views on other World War flashpoints were equally uncompromising. He was a staunch supporter of the Second Amendment, arguing in 2023 that it was worth it was worth it to have cost of, unfortunately, some gun deaths every year. This is his quote, so that we can have the Second Amendment to protect our other God-given rights. He was also an unabashed Islamophobe. And of course, people have heard about this and the fact that he was tweeting just before his death that Islam is the sword the left is using to slit the throat of America, and having previously compared the Prophet Muhammad to a child sex offender. The evolution from a campus advocate for fiscal conservatism to a leading voice of an apocalyptic culture war oriented Christian nationalism and placed him at the heart of America's deepest divisions. When we look at the assassination in the public square, a shot heard around the nation, the event at Utah Valley University on September the 10th, 2025 was the kickoff of Kirk's American Comeback Tour. The setting was characteristic with his campus appearances, an outdoor courtyard designed for maximum accessibility and engagement with students. For a crowd of approximately 3,000, 6 campus officers were assigned to provide security, a presence that some at the event later described as light. Kirk's team had reportedly requested the outdoor venue, prioritizing his ability to interact with students over the heightened security of an outdoor space. Moments before the attack, Kirk was engaged in a familiar back and forth with an audience member. The question was about mass shootings. Do you know how many transgender Americans have been mass shooters over the last 10 years? The person asked. As Kirk began to respond, a single shot rang out. Grisly videos, which spread virally across social media platforms, captured the horrific moment Kirk is seen jolting backward. His hand was reaching for his neck as blood gushed from the wound. The crowd's stunned gasps turned to screams as people began to run in panic. The attack was carried out with cold precision. The shooter, perched on the roof of a nearby building, fired a single shot from a high-powered Mauser .30 caliber bolt-action rifle from a distance of several hundred feet. Video captured the suspect then jumping from the roof and fleeing into a nearby neighborhood, leaving the weapon wrapped in a towel in the woods. Kirk was rushed to a nearby hospital where he was pronounced dead. This, of course, brings a fractured response and unity and division in the aftermath of the death of Charlie Kirk. And the initial reaction to Kirk's assassination was one of profound shock and bipartisan condemnation. Utah Governor Spencer Cox, a Republican, immediately labeled the attack as a political assassination. Meanwhile, President Trump, announcing the death on his social media platform, called it a dark moment for America and ordered flags lowered to half-staff. The morning crossed the political aisle. Progressive streamer Hassan Piker, who was scheduled to debate Kirk, called it a terrifying incident. Joe Scarborough, a frequent critic of Kirk, described the shooting as tragic and sickening, stating that violence targeting political public figures is violence against American democracy itself, and in that I agree. However, this moment of unity quickly fractured under the immense pressure of America's political polarization. Even as he called for an end to divisive rhetoric, President Trump sought to blame the radical left, asserting that their attacks on Kirk were directly responsible for the terrorism we were seeing. This sentiment was echoed and amplified across the right-wing media ecosystem. The influential X account Libs of TikTok posted simply, "This is war," unquote. The tragedy was not allowed a moment to be processed as a human event before it was conscripted into the very conflict that likely produced it. This instantaneous transformation of a national tragedy into a piece of political content to be wielded in the culture war is a defining characteristic of the current political and media environment. It reveals a dangerous feedback loop where political violence is not an endpoint, but becomes immediate fuel for the next phase of the conflict. The political fallout was swift and symbolic. In the U.S. House of Representatives, a moment of silence devolved into a partisan shouting match. In a gesture of high honor, Vice President J.D. Vance announced that he would accompany Kirk's casket on board Air Force Two for its final journey home to Arizona, a state Kirk and the TPUSA had helped deliver for Trump in the 2024 election. Now let's take a moment to look at the assassin. Yes, the case of Tyler James Robinson. He was an unlikely killer, and let's take a look at a portrait of this suspect. The man arrested and charged with the murder of Charlie Kirk was 22-year-old Tyler James Robinson of Washington, Utah. On the surface, his profile presented a series of jarring paradoxes that defied easy categorization. He had no prior criminal history. He grew up in what appeared to be a stable, loving, and active family. His parents, registered Republicans, ran a successful local business. Social media posts from his mother before they were deactivated depicted a typical family life, vacations to Disneyland and Alaska, and time spent outdoors, boating, fishing, and target shooting. In 2017 photo, a young Robinson is seen smiling while gripping a .50 caliber machine gun during a family visit to a military facility. Let's not also forget that his father was a member of law enforcement. Academically, Robinson was an outlier. He was a high school honor roll student who scored in the 99th percentile nationally on standard tests. A family video showed him reading his acceptance letter for a prestigious academic scholarship to Utah State University in 2021. However, his time there was brief. He attended only for one semester before leaving and enrolling in an electrical apprenticeship program at a local technical college. Those who knew him in his community described him as quiet and reserved. A store clerk who saw him often recalled he wouldn't talk unless you spoke to him first. This portrait of a quiet, academically gifted young man from a conservative religious family stood in stark contrast to the politically motivated assassin who meticulously planned out and executed the killing of a high profile public figure. Now, let's take a look at the pathway to radicalization and unraveling a motive. Now, the investigation into Robinson's motive revealed a complex pathway to violence where a simmering political grievance, fueled by online radicalization, intersected with a deeply personal connection to the culture war. According to his family and Utah Governor Spencer Cox, Robinson's politics had veered sharply leftwards in recent years, a shift they attributed to him spending large amounts of time in the dark corners of the internet. While he was registered to vote, he was unaffiliated with any political party and had not actually voted in the two most recent general elections, suggesting a disengagement from the formal political process, even as his ideological convictions were hardening. Now, his animosity towards Charlie Kirk was specific and known to his family. They recounted a recent dinner table conversation where Robinson mentioned Kirk's upcoming visit to Utah Valley University, and expressed his intense dislike for the activist's views, calling Kirk full of hate and spreading hate. This sentiment was echoed in evidence recovered by the FBI. Director Kash Patel stated that the investigators found a destroyed note or text message exchange in which Robinson allegedly wrote that he had an opportunity to take out Charlie Kirk and was going to do it. When asked why in the exchange, he reportedly replied, "Some hatred cannot be negotiated with." Again, another critical point that could have prevented this needless death. Now, a crucial element of the case is that Robinson's romantic partner is reportedly a transgender person. While authorities have not officially declared it a motive, this fact provides a powerful personal context for his reported anger at Kirk's well-documented anti-transgender rhetoric. It suggests that for Robinson, Kirk's political positions were not abstract, but a direct attack on someone whom he loved. The act of violence itself was inscribed with the language of this ideological conflict. Ammunition found with the rifle was engraved with anti-fascist and internet meme culture messages, including "Hey fascist, catch," and a line from an Italian anti-fascist anthem, "Bella Ciao," or Ciao. The forensic evidence directly links the assassination to a specific political subculture and worldview. The investigation proceeded rapidly after authorities released photos of the suspect. A family member recognized Robinson and, after confronting him, urged him to surrender. He was arrested late Thursday, on September the 12th, after a 33-hour manhunt. Subsequent forensic analysis provided a definitive link. DNA found on the towel wrapped around the rifle and on a screwdriver recovered from the rooftop matched Robinson's. Tyler Robinson's profile is not just that of a killer, but a microcosm of modern American culture war. He embodies the violent collision of opposing worlds, a conservative religious upbringing clashing with radicalizing online ideology, all brought to a flashpoint by a personal life directly impacted by the very issues Kirk weaponized for political gain. The physical act of violence was literally marked with the slogans of this war. This demonstrates a chillingly direct pathway where the abstract, rhetorical violence of political discourse, championed by figures like Kirk, can manifest as literal physical violence through individuals like Robinson who stand at the intersection of these profound societal fault lines. When you look at the anatomy of political violence in a polarized America, we can look at this from disagreement to dehumanization and the rise of effective polarization. Now, the assassination of Charlie Kirk cannot be understood as an isolated act of a disturbed individual. It is rather the lethal culmination of broader societal trends that have made political violence in the United States more frequent and more accepted than at any time in recent history. A key concept for understanding this dangerous shift is effective polarization. Unlike traditional ideological polarization, which involves disagreement over policies, effective polarization is the visceral, emotional animosity and distrust that partisans feel towards one another. Research indicates that while most American voters are not extremely polarized on the specifics of this policy, they are intensely polarized on an emotional level. This animosity is fueled by profound misperceptions about the demographic makeup, beliefs, and intentions of the opposing party. The us versus them mentality transforms political opponents from fellow citizens with differing views into existential threat to the nation's well being. This process of dehumanization removes the social and psychological barriers that normally inhibit violence, making it easier for some aggression to be seen as legitimate and even necessary as a political tool. Now, let's take a look at what's known as the permission structure, how rhetoric and media fueled this radicalization. Now, in such a deeply polarized environment, the information ecosystem can create what experts call a permission structure for violence. This structure is built and reinforced by two primary forces: the incendiary rhetoric of political leaders and a fragmented partisan media landscape. Now, a range of studies suggests that while there may not be a direct, legally provable line from a specific speech to a specific act of violence, the hostile rhetoric of and political leaders makes violence more likely, and gives it direction. It also makes it seem more legitimate. When leaders use dehumanizing language and they frame political contests as apocalyptic battles for the nation's soul and vilify entire groups of people, they can motivate aggressive or volatile individuals to translate those words into action. Once again, I bring up the case in point of Brian Kilmeade, who was a reporter that I brought up at the top of the show. He was a reporter at Fox who was let go because he made comments about killing the mentally ill homeless, that they would be better off, and other rhetoric to that nature. And he was dismissed from Fox News for that. And now, just a few days later, of course, we now know that there were two mass shootings at homeless encampments in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Once again, there is a real tough time when it comes to linking the direct statements by Brian Kilmeade to these mass acts of violence against the homeless. But again, it is something that comes in under the permissive structure and what we call, the permissive structure for violence. Now, as I was saying there, that when leaders are using dehumanizing language and frame political contests as the apocalyptic battles, this is what we see, where some individuals who are already at risk of taking action and suffer, generally, not always, but generally, they suffer from severe mental health issues as well. But this rhetoric is amplified and disseminated through a media environment that itself is a driver of polarization. Partisan cable news networks have been described as birthing centers for polarizing rhetoric, creating a cycle where they cater to a polarized audience with outrage-driven content, which in turn deepens the audience's polarization. Social media platforms accelerate this process, creating echo chambers and filter bubbles where algorithms feed users content that confirms their existing biases, amplifies extremist ideas, and spreads misinformation and conspiracy theories. This online environment has also charged the nature of violent extremism itself and changed it. The focus on organized groups has obscured a more pervasive trend, which is the ungrouping of political violence, where individuals like Tyler Robinson self radicalize through online engagement. White supremacist ideas, anti fascist ideologies, and conspiracy theories spread through a slippery language of memes and jokes, normalizing radical beliefs and blurring the line between online posturing and real world violence. This follows a pattern of escalation, and as we look at recent incidents of political violence in the United States over the last 24 or so months, the assassination of Charlie Kirk is not an anomaly, but a part of a clear and disturbing pattern of escalating political violence in the United States. Data from the first 6 months of 2025 shows nearly 40% increase in plots and acts of terrorism and targeted violence compared to the same period in 2024. The following is just a high profile incident organized in demonstrating that this violence is ideologically diffuse, targeting figures and institutions across the political spectrum. This pattern underscores the systemic nature of the crisis, which cannot be attributed to a single ideological party or political party. In Butler, Pennsylvania, in July of 2024, of course, we know that the assassination attempt was made on Donald Trump during a campaign rally. In December of 2024, in Manhattan, New York, Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare, suffered a fatal shot. And of course, he was a corporate executive, and this was allegedly motivated by anger over healthcare policy. As a side note, the charges of terrorism and first-degree murder have been dropped against the shooter, and he is now facing second-degree murder as well as other charges. In April of 2025 in Pennsylvania, Governor Josh Shapiro, who's a Democrat, was the subject of an arson attack targeting the governor's private residence. In May of 2025 in Washington, the Israeli embassy staff were targeted and two of them were slain by a suspect who allegedly expressed sympathy for Hamas. In June 2025 in Minnesota, Democratic state lawmaker was fatally shot, and and her husband were also shot in the home, and that again was in Minnesota. Now, in June of 2025 in Colorado, the parade for Israeli hostages took place, and that was a firebombing of a parade calling for the release of Israeli hostages held by Hamas. In September 2025 also, we are looking at Orem in Utah, and that again, as we're covering tonight, the Charlie Kirk assassination. And that happened during his speech on a public campus. And again, that's what we're focused on tonight. So this escalation has created a terrifying paradox at the heart of American society. Research reveals that very few Americans, and that is less than 3%, actually believe political murder is acceptable. However, a profoundly destabilizing number, more than a third, believe that their political opponents support such violence. This massive misperception gap creates a phantom enemy that makes the country feel far more dangerous than it actually is. An act of violence like Kirk's assassination, though perpetrated by a lone actor, tragically serves to validate this misperception for an entire political tribe. It proves to them that the other side is indeed murderous and bent on their destruction, and I use proves in quotation. This in turn makes them more likely to excuse the support retaliatory rhetoric and actions, creating a self-perpetuating feedback loop where the fear of violence amplified by a toxic media environment generates the very violence that is feared. Now we have to take a look at a call for unity and pathways to de-escalation in civil discourse. We've got to break the cycle of retribution. In the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination, the nation stands at a precipice. The path of least resistance leads downward into a retaliatory spiral where violence begets more violence. The "this is more" mentality is not a metaphor, it is a prescription for national self-destruction. Research on political violence shows that assassinations often create a process of escalation, encouraging extremists on the opposing side to feel the need to retaliate. Utah Governor Spencer Cox, speaking with heartbreak after the murder in his state, articulated the choice. We can return violence with fire and violence. We can return hate with hate. At some point, we have to find an off ramp, or it's going to get much, much worse. And I think that is a very good statement, to just basically saying that it has to end somewhere. And who's going to take the first step to ending this violence? Honoring the life lost requires a conscious, collective decision to seek that off ramp, to break the cycle of retribution before it metastasizes even further. When we look at strategies for a more civil society, from individual actions to systemic reform, the challenge of depolarization is immense, but it's not unsurmountable. A growing body of research points towards concrete strategies that can reduce animosity, promote civil discourse, and build resilience against political violence. These solutions operate at multiple levels, from individual interactions to systemic reforms. Interpersonal strategies, and that is the foundation of de escalation, is rehumanization. The contact hypothesis suggests that meaningful, sustained contact between members of opposing groups can reduce prejudice, especially when it involves a genuine exchange of ideas between individuals of similar social rank. This can be facilitated through structured dialogue programs and by emphasizing shared values and the surprising amount of common ground that exists on major policy issues, correcting the misperceptions that fuel effective polarization. This could also be encouraging perspective taking. This act of trying to see the world through another's eyes has been shown to be a powerful tool for increasing empathy and reducing malicious beliefs about disliked groups. Now let's take a look at something known as rhetorical hygiene. Political and media leaders bear a special responsibility to model responsible discourse. One of the most effective ways to shift group norms is for leaders to criticize extremism and hateful language within their own party. This signals what is unacceptable to their own followers as a way that attacks on the other side cannot. It is also critical to avoid dehumanizing language and jokes, which research shows can remove inhibitions to violence and stop repeating information, even for the purpose of debunking it, as a repetition can inadvertently reinforce the false claims. Now, when it comes to media and information literacy, in an era of rampant disinformation, building societal resilience is paramount. This requires two-pronged approach. First, social media companies must be held more accountable for the algorithms that amplify outrage and the spread of harmful content on their platforms. Second, citizens must be equipped with the tools of media literacy to recognize misinformation, manipulative rhetoric, and online radicalization pipelines. Training people to spot fake news and the activity of internet bots is more likely effective long-term strategy than simply trying to eliminate the bots themselves. Now, when we look at structural reforms, of course, while individuals and rhetorical changes are vital, lasting depolarization may require changes to the political structures that incentivize division. Ideas like citizens' assemblies, where representatives of groups of citizens are brought together to deliberate on different policy. This has shown promise in fostering compromise. Other proposals, such as moving towards more proportional voting systems, could reduce the zero-sum nature of winner-takes-all politics that exacerbates the us versus them mentality. As we take a look, of course, once again, I would like to mention that in the wake of the tragic assassination of Charlie Kirk, a stark reality has been laid bare. The urgent need for proactive, accessible public information, education, and awareness on the warning signs of radicalization and the strategies for violence prevention. To meet this challenge, ProPix TV and True Crime and Justice TV announce a joint initiative and the ongoing works of the PPCM Fund for Good. Now, the mission is clear, leveraging the production expertise of ProPix TV and the established public service model of True Crime and Justice TV. This initiative will develop and distribute a series of public service announcements, short documentaries, and educational resources that will be focused on recognizing warning signs educating the public on the behavioral and rhetorical indicators of an individual's path towards violent extremism, drawing on expertise from law enforcement and researchers in the field. Intervention and de-escalation is looking at providing clear, safe, and actionable strategies for friends, family members, and community leaders on how to intervene before grievances turn to violence and how to practice conflict de-escalation in tense situations. We're also looking at promoting media literacy, and that is teaching citizens how to identify misinformation, manipulative rhetoric, and online radicalization pipelines to build societal resilience against the forces of division. This is in addition to the works we've already been underway and been doing for many years now, including the distribution of physical books and resources to schools, educators, parents, and community groups, in addition to law enforcement and others. We've also been very involved in public education and online education and awareness of these issues and violence prevention, intervention, and other strategies. Now, how you can help, and that is varied in terms of your ability and your engagement. The ProPix Canada Media Fund for Good will directly finance the creation and distribution of the life-saving content across streaming platforms, broadcast television, and social media. In addition to the distribution of the physical resources throughout Canada and the United States, as well as internationally, the PPCM Fund for Good also provides funding to families and individuals in need, including victims of violence. Your donation can help turn this tragedy into a powerful force for good, fostering a safer, more understanding world. To learn more and donate, please visit the website at www.propixcanada.com. That's PROPICS Canada.com, and you can find the link to support the PPCM Fund for Good. To learn and donate, visit the website and let us choose education over anger and prevention over retribution. Now, the burden of leadership and the power of citizenship. The path away from political violence is not inevitable, it is a choice. It is only inevitable if nothing is done to change the course. The solution to this systemic crisis requires a commitment at all levels of society. It demands a heavy burden of leadership from politicians, media figures, and community organizers to actively de-escalate tensions, condemn violence unequivocally, and model the principles of civil discourse. Yet the power to heal the nation's divisions does not rest with leaders alone. It also resides in the daily choices of its citizens, in the conversations they choose to have, the information they choose to share, and the empathy they choose to extend. The research-backed strategies for depolarization are not abstract theories. They are practical tools available to everyone. To truly honor the tragedy of Charlie Kirk's death and the deaths of all victims of political violence and mass acts of violence is to reject the nihilistic allure of perpetual conflict. It is also to make a collective choice to invest in the difficult, necessary work of rebuilding a society based on the fundamental principles. Sorry, folks. Sorry, folks. I just had to respond to or read a message there that was incoming. My apologies. I try to read your messages as they come in. Sometimes they slip by, but my apologies. Thanks for the comment there to the anonymous user, actually. But in any event, to truly honor the tragedy of Charlie Kirk's death and the death of all victims of political violence is to reject the nihilistic allure of perpetual conflict, as I so stated. It is to make a collective choice to invest in the difficult, necessary work of rebuilding society based on the foundational principles of democratic engagement, mutual respect, and the shared belief that even in a nation of profound disagreements, violence can never be the answer. Thank you again for tuning in to this episode of Live Chat with James. I hope that you have learned something from it. I hope that there is a takeaway and that you will like, follow, and subscribe, or at least share this episode with others so that this message can be transferred and transcend all different political parties, all different ideologies, and that we can see some type of movement towards more peace and unity. This is, again, James Cousineau coming to you from ProPix TV in partnership with True Crime and Justice TV on this special episode. Make sure that you leave your comments below. And if you would like to comment without making it public, by all means, you can always email us, smile, S-M-I-L-E, at propixcanada.com. That's P-R-O-P-I-C-S Canada.com. If you wish to support the PPCM Fund for Good, you can also find the link at www.propixcanada.com, P-R-O-P-I-C-S Canada.com. Take care, everyone. Stay safe.